Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote podcast for all your information on the Latino vote, where you come for all of Mike Madrid's facts and numbers, but you really stay for the accents. Brother Mike, what are you doing, man?
Good morning. Good morning. Man, you do have that buttery, silky voice. You mentioned it. You were bragging about it. We got some comments about it online, but man, if I close my eyes, it's such a better experience.
It really is.
It's the senior that's tough, but you do have a voice for radio, man. You got a face for radio too.
Let me be clear. Look, mama didn't raise no fool. When you take a Mexican and you breed him with the redneck, you get this beautiful redneck brown voice. So people talk about multicultural being beautiful. I'm an example of multicultural. Mike, bring in, and I'm so excited today to be bringing in another Puerto Rican guest. So you bring in our good brother from up in the New England area.
Yeah, the Puerto Ricans are dominating the guest list today, which is fantastic. Look, I'm really excited about our guests today, Chuck. And right when I got the idea, I sent you a note, and you're like, "Absolutely, let's do it right now." For a couple of reasons. Julio Varela is somebody that I've been following on social media and paying attention to for well over a decade. He's not directly involved in the political space, but he is absolutely involved in understanding it and driving the voices that speak to it and understanding the impacts of what Latino representation in the media means. I can't think of anybody who is probably a more astute observer of the media ecosystem as it relates to Latino voices. And for old guys like Chuck and I, who have seen the number of Latinos in the press corps go from 2 or 3 to many times that in the decades we've been doing campaigns, one of the people who has been watching what the effects of that are on the American landscape, media landscape, political landscape, social landscape, cultural landscape, and has founded companies, has advised different organizations. And has watched the ups and downs of what that has meant for the voices of the fastest growing segment of America's population and the impacts culturally, is our good friend Julio Ricardo Varela, who does hail from New England. And Julio, I'm going to turn it over to you. I will keep talking about you all day because I'm just such a big fan.
If you don't stop him, Julio, he'll just go on and on.
Yeah, Mike, can we record? I'd like to just use that, and be like, "Hi, who am I?" It's like, here's my hype machine, Mike Madrid. I appreciate the love, and it's about flipping time. You guys invited me to this show. I've seen so many friends of mine on the show, like people that I respect, a lot of fantastic Latino journalists and political voices. And I'm like, I know them. When the hell are these two, cabrones going to invite me to their show? So here I am.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about kind of what got you started down this path. And I want to hear
how did you end up in Boston?
Yeah. And Latino Rebels. Like all of it.
Oh my God, dude. All right. So listen, I'm originally born in Puerto Rico to a Puerto Rican dad, and my mom is Bronx Italian. And I'm going to totally disclose this really quick, get it out of the way, because you can Google this. I come from a political family from my mom's side. So Mario Biaggi, the longest running, senior member of the New York delegation in the 70s and the 80s, the Tip O'Neill of New York, was my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
All right.
He was also indicted by Rudy Giuliani in the wet tech scandal. And I went to Harvard in 1986.
Look, that don't make you a bad person.
That makes you a New Yorker.
I know, but I'm just saying, I'm just letting it all out. I'm all letting it out so people know. Right. So my grandfather's trial was happening my freshman year at Harvard, the first semester at Harvard. And he was on the New York Post all the time. So I come from a political family. First of all, let's just get that out of the way. Now, I also fell in love with journalism and sports writing. And I became a sports editor for the Harvard Crimson. I covered Harvard hockey when they won the national championship. I interned at the Globe for the sports department, and I thought I was going to be the next great sports writer, and it didn't happen. So I stayed in Boston. Obviously, I went back to Puerto Rico, and then there was no jobs in Puerto Rico in 1991. It was like the recession. I had a Harvard degree. I came back to Cambridge, hung out with like 9 guys in some big, we were like the Real World Cambridge in 1991 to date myself. And I got into educational publishing. So I worked for Houghton Mifflin Company, which is one of the most revered publishing companies. You know, you talk about a New England institution. And I was the guy, I was a bilingual editor at the time of bilingual education, which we all know in the 90s and the aughts during the times of, you know, Ron-Uns and all that. It was
Campaigns
political.
I did here
public
in
school
California,
education.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Remember? And I was, you know, I'm really grateful for my bosses at Houghton Mifflin because I was that young bilingual, bicultural kid who understood that the future was Latino. And I was saying to these, you know, editors, kids need to see themselves in the literature. And it was really forward thinking in the 90s. People were like, what are you talking about? But I got to edit Rudolfo Anaya, Carmen Tafoya, Gary Soto. So my entire career, when you start looking at this, you know, after doing this for 30 years, my entire career was about like representation and we got to see ourselves. So I went down the educational publishing route. And then around the aughts, like in the middle, educational publishing imploded. It became sort of being taken over by tech companies, mergers, corporate, you know, typical corporate takeovers. And I became this sort of, you know, consequence of corporate takeovers. And next thing you know, I was underemployed, looking for my next thing. And I got back into journalism because I was an early Facebook adopter because I had a Harvard EDU email. I got onto this thing called Twitter. I'm never going to call it the letter. It's Twitter. And I just got there early, right? And I saw, and this is what it is. When you start as a journalist and then you start looking at like social media in the digital space when it was cool. Remember, it was cool back in the aughts. Yeah. Social media. It was actually like courteous. People were helpful and supportive. If you had different ideas, it's like, no, I agree. It's not the cesspool that it can be sometimes. But what's interesting is that I saw the future of journalism, right? And then I started blogging for myself. And I started talking about Puerto Rico in English. And I was like, I'm going to own this lane because no one's writing about this in 2009.
Right.
So I was covering, you know, Republican Governor Luis Fortuño, and they would usually get their Spanish, you know, it would be contained to Puerto Rico. And then I was the guy who's like, you know what, I'm going to write about this in English as a reporter, as a journalist. And I made a lot of connections and I saw something bigger, right? And I said to myself, this ain't about me. This is about how do you put your community first. And and this is where it all started. I was unemployed 2011 and I'm watching The Daily Show and I see Stewart and I'm like, wow, you know, he's a rebel. And I think Al Madrigal was on the show at the time. And I love Al and he's great. You know, I've known Al for several years, but I'm like, but Jon Stewart doesn't really speak to Latinos, right? So I write rebels on a piece of paper and I put Latinos at 2 a.m. and I went to bed. And I wake up the next morning and I look at my piece of paper and I go, this is a pretty damn good idea. So I bought I created the URL. I bought the URL, LatinoRebels.com. I created an LLC. And then I had so many connections in the digital space. A lot of Latinos like myself who were like, I don't see myself. And I'm talking about like Gen X, bilingual, bicultural kids who stopped watching Univision in the 80s and started watching MTV, who were listening to Green Day, but then Los Tigres del Norte, you know, that type of vibe.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yes. Like sort of like, you know, I live in both worlds. I'm unapologetic. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm like, you know, I live in the Northeast, but, you know, Puerto Rico's home. I root for the Puerto Rican basketball team, you know, all this stuff. And I didn't see it. And I said, you know, the future really of our community, as controversial as this is, and people would be like, you're crazy in 2011, is English. Because a lot of my generation and the generations after, you know, I hate to say the word assimilated because that always has sort of this like charged word, but let's just be honest. Like we're looking at the classic assimilation model in the United States with our community. Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of mistakes in putting too much emphasis on what, you know, the Univisions and Telemundos of the worlds of the 80s and the 90s, who, to be honest with you, they did not address my generation. So Latino Rebels would not have been a success if these larger Spanish language networks were like, wait a minute, we got to start producing things for this generation now, digital, English, bilingual, bicultural. And, you know, and I consulted for Univision in 2009. You know, I was saying this stuff and people be like, you know, the truth is the truth. History is history. If we look at the pattern of communities and, you know, new communities in the United States, immigrant communities in the United States, there is a pattern eventually that whatever you say, you could still be proud of where you came from. But in the end, you want to be part of the American experience, both the good and the bad, right? So when I created Latino Rebels, and I love all my friends that were like, we're going to help you. We created a Facebook group, and they would just send me stories of like people that did shit against our community. And I'd be like, all right, I'll write it under Rebels. And they were like, we're in it. It was fun. I was like, I got no money. It's like, I don't know what this is going, but like, I have really, really good friends who are like, I believe in this. And they felt very proud the first couple of years. They call themselves founding members, right? Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. From 2011 to 2012, we were doing so many things that I get a call from CBS News, Face the Nation, in 2012. And I'm a, quote, blogger, okay? And all of a sudden, I'm on a panel with, let me see if I can remember who it was. Issei Morales, I believe. It was Gabby Dominiczuelan of the Obama campaign. I think it was Benita Inclán of the RNC, myself, and there was somebody else. And I was like, I'm on Face the Nation in 2012, and I created a blog. This is something bigger, right? This is bigger.
Yeah.
And if you go back to 2012, people tend to forget, like Latino Rebels was there when you know, immigrant activists occupied the Obama campaign in office in Denver. They were there when, you know, Mitt Romney was claiming he's all of a sudden on
self-deportation too.
Yeah,
that was the 2012 year, right? That was the Obama deporter in chief. And
exactly.
You're right.
People forget about this one.
Yeah.
People forget about this one, but I still think it's on Rebels. There was something that President Biden said when he was a vice president at La Raza, you know, now Unidos US, which to me, when I hear it, was kind of like, there's the problem with institutional Democrats when it comes to our community. And what he said was like, if you don't vote for us, all of you are going to get deported. He said something to that effect. It's on record. We wrote about it, right? Yeah. Back in the day, it was kind of nichey. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of like, oh, the blog, the digital guys, ooh, they're causing trouble. Like, I got so much flack from everyone, from all sides, right? And advertisers were like, we're not going to advertise for you. Like, you're just a troublemaker. And I said, you know what? Stay the course. I'm a journalist. I'm just going to tell what my community is experiencing, and I'm going to do it with the one thing that I brought to Rebels that was really important, because I was a journalist, it wasn't going to be shit. Okay. It was going to be high premium, real journalism. Right. And so out of the gate, it's what's saying about, you know, it might have not been the biggest audience, but guess who paid attention? Latino journalists, political journalists, you know, Juan Gonzalez, the legendary Juan Gonzalez of Democracy Now! Was the first person who was like, you got something here. The second person who told me this was Maria Hinojosa. Okay, in 2012 with a tweet. The third person was Jorge Ramos, right? So all of a sudden, I'm getting journalists and media people following this blog, right? So this quote unquote blog. So I'm just like, dude, this is fun.
And is it just you? You're the one writing all the content?
I'm the writer. Yeah, I'm the writer editor, and I had this amazing group of people. Yeah. The first 2 years was like I was Latino Rebels, and I was being, you know, in hindsight, I was very conscious of not saying like this is all me, because there was like 15, 20 people who were part of that Facebook group who were this is what's cool about it. They represented every community in the United States, and they believed that we were being like misunderstood. So it was like I had these like reporters out there who were like, hey, this just happened in Minnesota, or this just happened in like Arizona, or this, and I'm like, give it to me. I'm going to write it. Let's go. Right. But to fast forward, I get a DM from a producer at Al Jazeera America in 2013. And they're like, we want you to audition for this new show called The Stream. So Chuck, you're going to love this. I get brought to like, you know, DC, the St. Regis Hotel on K Street. I'm like 2013. I'm still like underemployed. I'm raising 2 kids. I'm married. I'm like, paying my bills. And I'm like, okay, I'm literally 2 blocks away from the White House right now. And I'm about to audition for a show that's global. Right. So I became a digital media editor for Al Jazeera's stream and got to make a couple of appearances both on Al Jazeera English and Al Jazeera America. And what was so interesting about that experience, even though Al Jazeera America imploded, it was on K Street, and it was the most diverse newsroom I've ever seen in my life. Right? It was everyone from all over the world. I am so proud of like that year and a half. And then all of a sudden it imploded and I get laid off, and I'm going, all right, what do I do? And a friend of mine said, you need to talk to Futuro Media. And in late 2014, and I got I met Maria finally, and I was like, okay, I just met Maria and Hosa. And they gave me a job on the spot, like a part-time job in the digital space. And I got to become digital director. And one of the things Maria told me was like, don't ever stop working on Latino Rebels. And I said, Maria, but I need a job, right? So I can't work this on this is my side hustle.
Right.
And I'm very grateful to a couple of people, Marlena Fitzpatrick, Charis Delgadillo, Christian Enriquez, and Hector Luis Alamo, Monica Ramirez. Used to Monica Ramirez, from Women Rising, Monica Ramirez, like she's a big activist. She was my co-host on Latino Rebels Radio in 2014. Okay. So there's touchstones. Like what was cool about it is like, there was just a cool group of people. And Hector Luis Alamo, who I love to death, I told him straight up, it's like, I can't run this all the time. Can you take it over while I work at Futuro? And he's like, yeah. It's like, I got no money. He goes, don't worry about it. This is my journalism school. Yeah. Like, that's what he told me. He's like, this is my journalism school. And we started getting all these contributors from all over just sending us stories, and we would just publish them. Right. And then
I was going like, what is this? This thing keeps growing and there's new names, and it's just
it was like all these people who were just pitch us. Yeah. I swear.
Yeah.
They were just like, okay, at least I'm going to get published. This is my vibe. Right. And then 2016 comes around, and that's when I get to know Mr. Rocha over there, who starts, and I know it, and I don't regret it. But what was interesting is that we went all in when I was covering politics for Latino USA at Futuro Media. Latino Rebels was still active, and it was very clear to us because we saw a younger, English-dominant, bilingual, bicultural demographic that was questioning the Democratic Party, was questioning the Republican Party, and they see this like older, like white-haired senator from Burlington, Vermont, become like their deal, and that was clear. Like we saw that clearly, that our demographic was all in with Bernie Sanders, and there was and one of the things that I noticed is they were very conscious about Mexico and Puerto Rico and Latin America and the relationship with the United States. They were very sophisticated, and one of the things that really got me sort of like a little bit frustrated with 2007. Well, there's 2 things that got me frustrated with 2016 political coverage. But the first one was this notion that young Latino voters weren't engaged. Because Chuck, I don't know about you, but I saw it online. We were getting there was actually more interest that I was like, wow, like this is a new wave, and the demographics were showing.
Can I jump in there?
And then the other go ahead.
Because you're saying something really profound here, and people really need to listen to this, because this is the exact moment that I'll never forget it. It was like a couple days before Christmas, and the Nevada caucuses were coming up, and there's this "Not My Abuela" hashtag.
That was us.
Unbelievable.
That was Latino Rebels. We were the first ones to publish that.
I'm like, this is something that's profoundly different in Latino politics. I remember I literally was in my room and I sat up and I was like, this can't be, this is organic, because it was in response to what the Hillary Clinton campaign did. And it kept going. And suddenly there's dozens and dozens, and then there's hundreds and hundreds, and then there's thousands of people responding to this. And everybody was weighing in with their own personal story about how Hillary Clinton was not their abuela and how removed Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party were from their Mexicano, Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, all of their experiences. And I was like, this is nuts. This is a new day. And I knew it started saying, Clinton's got a problem, man. These younger Latinos are not
and as a and as a political journalist and as a political editor who values, I don't work for campaigns. Like, let's just start there. I've never have, ethically.
Don't say it like that. Don't say it like it's a bad thing.
No, but here's the thing that's really important. But here's the thing that's really important. Yeah, as a journalist, but here's the thing that's really important. When that happened, which at its moment, it was probably our most trafficked story. It's probably top 5. And I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views when people actually would read digital stories in 2016. We can talk about now, but what's interesting is that there was a lot of pushback in the sense of, why are you doing this? You're not putting our community first. And I would argue it's quite the opposite. Like, what's happening with this new demographic, and you can go the numbers. It's younger than, it's just younger.
The generational divide is extraordinary.
It's a right. And
under 40, under 35 voters were with Bernie 80% plus. Over 35 were with Hillary 80% plus.
Right. And it was more progressive. It was more engaged. It didn't want to be talked down. You see, the other thing about Rebels that really, really sort of exposed a truth is that Rebels helped solidify and confirm the feeling that Latinos weren't a quote unquote market anymore. Okay. We weren't, we were having conversations of like the census inventing the label Hispanic, right? Or we weren't a brand, right? And so we fought against this whole stop marketing to us and start talking to us, right? And start engaging to us. And to this day, and I'll say it, because this will be my 4th election cycle. I don't even know anymore. The Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign, to me, will always be where that divide was made very clear. And I am still 100% convinced that the Democratic Party still hasn't come to terms with that. And, Chuck's was inside those circles, but from looking at it as a political journalist, as a political commentator, as a political observer who was putting his community first, it was pretty clear the level of enthusiasm and sort of this notion of, we don't want the Democrats of the 1990s anymore. Okay.
So a little spoiler here.
And the reality is, and it's still there, right? It's still there. Here we are in 2024.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah, because the culture, and it's an institutional comment. It's not a partisan comment. It's all of these people came up during the 90s and before saying, this is what Latino issues are. This is the way Latinos think. This is what we do. And that moment, look, this was such a significant moment. I have a book coming out in June. I'm not pushing the book yet, Chuck. Don't get nervous. Jesus but I'd write about this moment in the book.
Chuck's quiet. Chuck, I feel like Chuck's going to come hard at both of us.
It's just like this right now. Why would I try to jump in between you two? You two love to talk and hear each other talk more than 2 other Latinos I've ever seen in my life.
Except for the guy in the mirror.
Chuck Rocha is saying that he
I didn't say shit.
More than Chuck.
I've been quiet. Where am I going to jump in at?
Talk more than Chuck. I like to fact check that.
Where am I going? People come on this podcast. It's going to be the lowest viewed podcast in our history because it's been 30 minutes and I ain't got to say nothing yet. So people probably are just going to tune out.
People are going to be like, I feel
you're here for the educational part of this. Let's think about what was just said. Let's go back to talking about how important I am and how good I am. So here we go. 40% of the electorate, we said in the last podcast that we had with our good brother, Adrian Carrasquillo, who brought up a great point. And I think that Julio, you and Mike brought up a point that people should think about in anchoring this in Madrid math, which is so much of the electorate is so much different than it was in 2016. Thank you for the nice comments about the Bernie stuff. I appreciate it. We talk about it a lot. We all know it. I wrote a whole book about it. And I'm glad that I got to be a part of that, because I not only helped orchestrate it, but I learned a lot. That's what's different with a lot of political consultants today, is that, and Mike has given me lots of props of me working in a factory and getting to do this work. And so when I show up somewhere, I don't think I know everything. I think that I am trying to learn from people who are doing it and then put my spin on it. But with these new voters, and the question I have for you, brother, is that going through this long story that you just told, which is pretty incredible when you think about, all the trials and tribulations of what you've seen in a changing media landscape, is that so much of the electorate now is new. Adrian said last week that it's 40% of the Latino vote hasn't voted, is all new since 2014, 2012, or is it 16, Mike? 16. So during the Bernie Sanders stuff.
Yeah.
So now let's leap forward, because I'd love your insight on what I find today, and what me and Mike talk about is that these voters, because back then in the blogging world and the digital quote unquote world that you helped pioneer with Latino Rebels, now we're spread across even more factions. And now there's TikTok, and now there's all these. I say that today, y'all, as there's a hearing happening just less than a mile and a half from where I'm recording this, where all the largest companies, executives of all the social media companies are testifying in the US Senate around what they're doing to secure their platforms. But now that we have all of these different platforms, where are these new voters consuming the most of their information and getting their news today, brother?
That is a fascinating question, and the answer to that is everywhere.
That's what I assume.
So here's the thing. Yeah, that's the problem, right? So you want a specific answer, but what happens is, as you become to quote unquote democratize information, and that's a very like when I say democratize information, that's dangerous, right? When everything is flat, right? What needs to rise is actual experience, context, history, and sort of credibility. Okay. So in the end, like, journalism will never quote unquote go away. But what you're going to start seeing, and especially we haven't even talked about, like, in the world of AI and disinformation and all that, right? What needs to happen is that credibility and authority and people that put the community first, and in this specific case, the Latino community, need to get elevated, or else game over. Okay. So one of the things that I'm finding in sort of this new next phase, because I absolutely agree with you, Chuck, in the sense of that 2016 was a moment which carried into 2020, right? But I think 2024 is actually getting to a lot of what you've said and what you've written, Mike, in the sense that, and let's just focus on the Latino community. Right now, I would probably say, like, maybe a couple of years ago, you can identify maybe 2 or 3 sectors, traditional, like older, there's younger progressive, there's more moderate. Now it's very fractured. But one of the things that people don't talk about that really hit me probably around like 2008 and doesn't get explored a lot by political journalism, and I've tried, is the fact that most Latinos are independent. And the majority of them are. If you look at the latest data, if you look at Pew, and if you look at what's happened, most Latinos are looking as like, we're seeing more of a rise in sort of this independent voice. And I think it's a general national trend. But when you start looking at the numbers, obviously Latinos are part of that. So I think there is a skepticism about traditional parties. We haven't even begun to think about the last, from 2015 when Trump went down the escalator to now, what's happened there, right? Now, I will say that, and I've said this in the past, I've written about it, and I've said this, Republicans are very smart with their Latino outreach. They don't need to get 70% of Latinos. They just got to get 30 to 40. And guess what? They've done it in the past. Mm-hmm. So if you get 30 to 40, like, great, right? But now what's happened, which is what's really concerning, and this is why it's actually a good and bad thing, is that the Republican and mostly Trump strategy is now knowing how to pit community members against each other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they go, hey, you know what? You're a citizen now, bro. Like, you really need, like, you want these guys coming in? And they're playing off of that, right? And they're and the problem is, and this is the problem with American political journalism right now, is that, and I feel really strongly about this, that I hate to turn this into a journalism class, but this is really an important point. You know, political parties have a self-interest, right? Let's just be honest.
Oh, well, that's what they
The
do.
Self-interest is like, I gotta win, and I gotta like.
It's not the country's interest; it's their own interest. Yeah, it's about power.
It's their own interest, right? So what's happened is you start creating these narratives and these messages that, because of access, okay, because in this competitive landscape of political journalism, there's this illusion that if you have access to a Trump or a Biden, you're going to be a better political journalist. Okay. So what's happened, and you see it, it's like you do have sort of this political class, both in the politics side and in the journalism side. And the people that are around the edges, and I kind of consider myself one who kind of still says, you know, I'm the type of journalist that will question both sides. Okay. And, you know, there's people like, why do you do it? It's like, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to bring truth to power, right? So, but the bigger machine of political journalism is so massive, okay, that there's not a lot of people around the edges who can sort of chip away at it, right? So the point being is that once you start looking at the political machine, and you mentioned Adrian, who's an incredible friend of mine. I mean, I've known Adrian since like 2009. Like, when he was, you know, he joined Fox News Latino. Like, think about that. When we had NBC Latino, Fox News Latino, CNN, there was like, oh my God, this is going to go in the right direction. Like, they're all gone. And NBC Latino is now part of NBC News. At least they're doing the work, but a lot of that is gone. Mm-hmm. But the point being is, when you start looking at the bigger sort of like access type of political journalism, mm-hmm, besides a handful of people like Sabrina Rodriguez, who's a friend, Adrian Carrasquillo, Jasmine Ulloa, you know, Jenny Medina, like people that are writing for the Times and the Post and the Message, you know, like really great reporters who are really covering the community the way they should be covered. We're like, you think we're a quote unquote minority in mainstream? Like, when you get into political journalism, I can count them with my hands. So, and the other thing that has happened, which always happens in political journalism, is that the people that brought these issues about the Latino vote in 2012 or in 2008, or even with, you know, Daddy Bush in 2004 or 2012 or 2016, like, now a lot of the narratives have become mainstream. So now you see non-Latino journalists talking about immigration issues, talking about Latinos aren't a monolith, like all that stuff. Like, that's become sort of its own genre, like its own trope.
Brother, you got to see what happens in political consulting. My God.
Yeah, what I fear.
Those white guys are the best Latino political consultants. You know, I haven't seen that, heard of these people in 30 years, and now they're experts at this stuff.
Right. And so what I fear is, you all know, I know a lot of people know that we are getting more complex. We are evolving into a voting bloc. We are not a mature voting bloc, both from a youth perspective and from a political power perspective. Mm-hmm. We're seeing it evolve in the moment, right? But then there's this whole thing where it's like, well, guys, going to be 66 million in 25. Like, why, why are you not doing this? And you should all vote Democratic and all this and all that. And like, and the problem is, it's sort of this two-edged sword. It's like, you now have this narrative that has become sort of mainstream that is a little bit tiring, to be honest with you. Because I'm sitting here in 2024 and I'm like, I can't do the same take. I can't do the same observations that I did in 2012. Like, we have to push this forward, right? So you have that, and I'm grateful that at least I get to write columns for MSNBC where I can try to look at some of that complexity, especially in the immigration debate, and that, which is fascinating the hell out of me right now. But I worry that on the local reporting angle, on the political reporting angle, on the fact that all the numbers show that Latinos, the next 20, 30 years, it's going to be, the defining moments. Like, I think we're going to finally see sort of, we are a powerful voting bloc and a powerful political force. We are not there yet at all. I say this Latino political power is an illusion, and it's what it is. And you're starting to see a lot of backlash. But I do think the next 20, 30 years is a Latino future. And we as members that put the community first have to be constantly vigilant and aware of this, in the sense that if we are not leading with the complexities, we are now doing a disservice to our community. Because I do not want to become a trope in the mainstream. We still have opportunities to push through this. Can you
be both, though? Can you be both complex and a block? I mean, I think that's the struggle, right?
I think you can, but the problem is, it's like, I personally think that ourselves as a community, we don't own our narratives, right? Yeah. So it's very important. It's very important. So one of the things that I'm really looking back with what Rebels was, and how it, the last 12 years of Rebels and moving forward, you need to have these infusions throughout this this path that question it, that begin to challenge that mainstream narrative, or else you're just going to succumb to it, right? And I think this is a moment, right? And I think, I understand sort of the partisanship of it all, where, believe me, I the last piece I wrote for MSNBC, why are you doing this? Like, I get it. I get that, but my armor's thick now, in the sense it's like, well, you shouldn't raise this issue about Biden. I'm like, he's a politician of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He's following the Clinton template that, again, stole. Like, can we just be honest?
Right.
Like, do you remember that ad? Do you guys remember this ad of Clinton in 1996? It says, like, President Bill Clinton has deported the most immigrants ever in the history of the United States. Bob Dole is, like, weak on immigration. Vote Clinton. You're like, that's 1996.
Yeah.
With the same imagery that you see in Prop 187 ads, in Trump ads, and all this. So do not convince me that this is not an issue that is just a quote unquote Republican, issue. This is a history of bipartisan trying to other communities that we have allowed as Americans to say, like, yeah, no, that's right. Mexicans are criminals. Like, I'm not going to be convinced otherwise. It's just not, you're talking to a Puerto Rican here, like,
speaking of the Puerto Ricans,
I'm just getting the word colony is finally becoming part of the political lexicon after, like, since 1898. That took a while. Like, I was saying that in 2008, when you look at U.S. code for Puerto Rico, the United States owns Puerto Rico. Congress owns Puerto Rico. Okay, let's call it for what it is. And let's just move on, and let's try to look at this reality. And the only way this moves the needle is that the community needs to look at itself introspectively, needs to realize, hey, we have different political ideologies, but we can still sit in the room, right? And I'm, as a journalist observing this, I love the fact that the two of you guys, this is, like, beautiful. And you have a show together. Like it's important for this show to continue to move and look at this complexity. And I'm really
speaking of the complexity of this vote. Let's jump in here, because we don't have much time left. And I'd be interested to know, like, coming from the Puerto Rican community around Boston, and then so much of the Puerto Rican community around Orlando gets a lot of notice. And then, me and Mike have talked extensively about the impact that the Puerto Rican community had on the Pennsylvania Senate race. And because of all of the horrible things that have happened on the island, from climate disasters, from all of the things that America has done to that island, and the things that you were going on your TED Talk about, which you absolutely should. But tell me, culturally, in your community, the way that you think about the community of Puerto Ricans, whether you have this base of Puerto Ricans who went to New York and they built this entire community around their culture in New York, which is really iconic and beautiful. They wrote plays about it. But these offshoots of what you don't think about, which is Boston, which is Bethlehem, which is, or it's parts of Orlando and Orange County.
Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland, right.
Cleveland, Ohio.
Is there differences between those clutches of culture?
You know, one of the things that I say about the Puerto Rican vote, and no one, you know, and maybe this is my pitch for my next, you know, when I have time to write a book. One of the things that's happening now is exactly what's happened with Latinos in sort of this sort of traditional new voter model, because of the displacement and because of the outmigration that's coming out of Puerto Rico to, because, you know, it's outmigration. Right? People move, get on a JetBlue and go to different parts of the country. You know, a lot of people don't realize that here in New England, Puerto Ricans have been here since the mill towns. You know, we were the cheap labor of New England in the 30s and the 40s, you know, and you know, communities like Cleveland, Atlanta, you know, parts of not only Orlando, but northern Florida, right? But what's interesting, and the thing about Pennsylvania is perfect example. Those political candidates that begin to realize that Puerto Rico is an issue that people care deeply about, like that could move the needle. But this is the reality. And this is what really, you know, my fellow, you know, Puerto Ricans that live on the island, who I love, believe me, like that's home to me. They need to realize that the political power of Puerto Rico is actually stateside. Like they have representation.
Yeah.
And the problem with us is that we've had this sort of like, you're not Puerto Rican enough because you don't live on the island anymore. And the reality is like, but we have we actually have the vote. So why don't we work together to actually uplift like the issue? Give us one issue, right? It's not just about statehood. It's just about like, how are we treated? Like, don't ignore us. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, and the politicians that take advantage of that, I think that is low-hanging fruit for Democrats, believe me, because they are in Puerto Ricans are in traditional districts that vote Democratic. And I think just a little bit of a boost will go a long way. But the problem is, and this is what happens with Puerto Rico, is that it's always been a bipartisan issue. You know, we're in a colonial relationship with the United States. Republicans, Republicans and Democrats, they have similar policies. And, you know, then you have someone like Trump who's like, I want to sell it to Finland, wherever it was. And so it's such a misunderstanding. And it's such a, you know, Puerto Ricans are the second largest Latino group in the United States behind the fabulous Mexicanos. Mm-hmm. But again, another example of an electorate that the numbers are there. They have not reached any real power, but with the right organization and the right outreach and the right strategy, you can own that vote for the next 3-4 decades, whether you're Republican or Democrat.
Hear, hear. I mean, truer words never been said. We're going to bring this to a close, but I want you to give us some final thoughts, Julio, if that's okay, on how this election cycle, this presidential cycle in the Latino vote is different from the last few that you have seen. Are the parties behaving differently? Are our voters behaving differently? Is the media behaving differently? All of the above, some of the above. I mean, what's different from your perspective on how we are entering the first month or two of 2024 when we're going to elect a president in November compared to the last few presidential election cycles? What's different with the Latino vote?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot there. I mean, the enthusiasm issue is always going to be there. I mean, I feel ever since the Obama coalition, that was sort of the peak of the new Latino wave, you know, and now here we are in 2024 and you start seeing more of is it even worth it? Right? Like that type. And however people portray that, there's something there. Right now, I think Democrats really have to rethink how they outreach and communicate to the Latino community. I feel some of the campaign things that are happening are still kind of stuck in sort of a 1990s type strategy. And which makes sense, you know, because that's sort of the world that the president comes from. I think that world has changed. I think one of the things that people tend to forget is that the numbers are greater. So even though people say like, well, Latinos are voting more Republican, more voters who are Latino vote Democratic. So the share might be a little bit, you know, it's not as big, but there's just more voters.
The raw numbers are still benefiting the Democrats.
The raw numbers. So like in the end, don't you want to get the most voters? Right. Yeah. So those issues, feel to me from a political standpoint, I think the jury's still out, and it's something that we'll see. Right. Although, if, like I wrote in MSNBC, if Biden says, you know what, the immigration debate, I lost, and I just need to get it off my plate, and I'm going to focus on the economy, women's issues, threats to democracy, all things that are really important to our community. When you look at the polling, that if that's a strategy to win re-election, that's a strategy. Now, the problem on the other side, which really concerns me, and I'm sure you've seen this poll, 47% of this country agrees with Trump that immigrants are poisoning the blood of this nation. Yeah. I'm like, 47% of the country, not 47% of Republicans, 47% of the country.
Which means there's a lot of Latinos who are saying that, by the way.
Exactly. But there's also a lot of people who are also looking at what's happened the last couple of years and saying, when you get inundated with images and of things that are, that become tropes and they're not being challenged. Yeah. I mean, when Trump, here's my program, I'm a sports nut and I listen to Boston sports radio. So during the New Hampshire primary, the Trump commercial ran on Boston sports radio. And I felt like it was Pete Wilson and Prop 187. And I said to myself, how much has this progressed? It hasn't. It's just gotten a bigger platform. And yes, do people think, I see it all the time in the work that I do, in the sense it's like, you're just a DEI choice, right? So the backlash is happening.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? The backlash is happening. And there's always going to be a sector of the Latino community who sides with that. And that's always been the case. Because when you start looking
I do think it's bigger. I do think it's bigger.
It's always been there.
Well, it's bigger now because you bring up Pete Wilson, and I think that's a really apt comparison, because if you look at the demographics of where California was when Pete started Republicans down this path, they're virtually identical to where the rest of the country is now, 25 years later. So you're exactly right. We have seen this rodeo before. I don't know if that's the right use of rodeo, Chuck, but I'm going to use it in this. It's the right use of.
Hey, can Chuck be the rodeo judge?
Yeah, he is on the show. And so much of that torturous demographic change is exactly why we kind of bring voices like yours to the table. And what I do want to say is, because we are out of time, I appreciate the hell out of you and appreciate the hell out of your work. I mean, it's the toughest part of being 20 years ahead of your time is you got to wait 20 years for people to catch up, right? And then by the time they do it, we're like, oh yeah, this is common sense. And you're like, well, I've been telling you for 2 decades.
I'm already thinking about, but the thing is, it's like, I'm already thinking about Latinos in 2040, because there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And you all are doing amazing work.
Well, we appreciate
Chuck, I'm sorry I made you quiet today.
I don't know where you were expecting me to jump in there at whatever point. Y'all two stop talking. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Latino Vote podcast. Don't forget to like, don't forget to share, don't forget to send a review. Thanks to our brother who decided to come on this show and give us a little of his wisdom. And again, make sure you tell your friends, and don't forget to call your mama.